Our next speakers are Sean Carleton and Julia Smith, who have already been introduced as graduate students at Trent University at the Frost Center. They're both graduates of Simon Fraser University. And to get a master's at SFU is no easy task. The department really specializes in master's work at the grad level, and you have to write something like a book to get an MA from that school. So it's wonderful to see them here back east and doing so well. Sean has an important article on the construction of the textbook Indian in mid-20th century British Columbia in BC Studies. And Julia has an article that is a good slice of her master's thesis in labor reflective eye, a study of Sorwa, which was the classic sort of intersectional left feminist movement of the 1970s in Vancouver. So they're up and coming, but they're these folks, in fact, all young students today, they have to, have different modalities, and Julia and Sean are also interested and very active spark plugs in the graphic history movement, and we'll hopefully be learning something about that today. The subject, the title of their presentation, drawn out of Keeley and Palmer's famous book on the Knights of Labour, is Dreaming of What Might Be, the Future of Canadian Working Class History. And again, you need the lights off, and okay, super.
So thanks for the introduction, Ellen. And Sean, I want to start by actually thanking, or where did Brian go? He's back. Awkward. Thank you, Brian, for inviting us to be on this panel and to participate in the conference. He's put together, as you can see, a great program, and it should be 2 days of interesting papers and conversations. So thanks to Brian for all his work. As Alan said, we've taken the title of our paper, Dreaming of What Might Be, the Future of Canadian Working Class History, from the title of Brian and Greg's book, Dreaming of What Might Be, the Knights of Labour in Ontario, 1880 to 1900. There it is. So published in 1982, Dreaming of What Might Be was one of the first contributions to the then new field of Canadian working class history. In the book, Brian and Greg examined the history and significance of the 19th century North American labor organization, the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labour. In contrast to previous studies, which dismissed the Knights as insignificant or a failure, Brian and Greg argue that they were important because they provided workers with a vision of an alternative to industrial capitalist society. Brian and Greg show how, and here I'm quoting, the Knights of Labour contributed to the working class effort to break out of the confines of received wisdoms, and for a number of years instilled within working men and women the capacity to dream of what might be, rather than to acquiesce in what was. So we've chosen to structure our comments on the future of Canadian working class history around this quote, because like the Knights of Labour in the 19th century, like Brian and Greg when they wrote Dreaming of What Might Be, and the numerous books and articles that they've both authored since then, and like many of the people who contributed to the field over the years, we see working class history as more than just an academic pursuit. Specifically, we believe that working class history is a political tool, that it can serve as a powerful method of consciousness raising and a vital strategic resource. When working people can see themselves in the past, we can develop a sense of ourselves not just as a class in ourselves, but as a class for ourselves. When we study the past, we see how the issues we face now are connected to those of people who came before us. When we examine previous strategies and struggles and victories and losses, we can devise new ways of organizing for social transformation today. So with this view of what Canadian working class history has been and can be in mind, Sean and I want to discuss how building on the past accomplishments of working class history can help ensure that it continues to be a dynamic, engaged, and politically useful field. We'll just focus on 4 strategies today. So 1, using Marxist understandings of class. 2, building institutions to support the study of working class history. 3, teaching at the undergraduate level. And 4, engaging the public. And we want to emphasize that we don't see these strategies as new. Rather, we think they are tools and tactics that have been central to the development of Canadian working class history as a field of study, and that we should continue to use them in new ways in the future. As Trotsky wrote, "Those who cannot defend old positions will never conquer new ones." And I noticed Wayne also mentioned Trotsky, so we should have a drinking game going at this conference every time Trotsky gets mentioned. We have a drink. Maybe it's a bit early.
We got the party cups in here.
Yeah, actually. Okay, so first and foremost, we believe working class history must continue to focus on working people as a class defined in the Marxist sense, and not just union members and labor bureaucrats. So as many people in this room know, until the 1970s, analyses of industrial relations and institutional histories of trade unions dominated the Canadian labor historiography. Although these early publications provided important information about labor activity in Canada, given their focus on unions and the fact that most workers were not unionized, these studies did not examine the experiences of the majority of the working class. In the 1960s and 70s, however, developments in international historiography and theories of class, particularly studies of working class formation, culture, and control, led to a shift in the trajectory of labor historiography in Canada. Most importantly, they breathed new life into Marxist understandings of class as a relationship rooted in workers' lived experience, and they inspired a new generation of scholars to undertake analyses of class experience, formation, and culture in Canadian history. Unfortunately, over the past 3 decades, the majority of historians have moved away from Marxism and the idea of class as a social relationship. Instead, many people now view class as an identity often linked to income. And just a good contemporary example of this. We don't think we look to the Canadian federal election. Sorry, Alvin, I'm stealing some of your thunder maybe here. For the misunderstanding and misuse of class. So for people who were not here during the election, the 3 major political parties, including our supposedly left New Democratic Party, or NDP, campaigned on the promise that they would create a stronger middle class. And this flyer, I could not believe it. It was just a new low for me. Informs the reader that after 10 years of our now former Prime Minister, that's one bonus, Stephen Harper, middle class families and those fighting to get into the middle class just can't get ahead. So as you can see, the NDP was determined to avoid talking about the working class. They've now been labeled those fighting to get into the middle class. But returning to what we're supposed to be talking about, working class history. The point is that given the fundamental role of capitalism, I'm ahead of myself here, in shaping the development of Canada, scholars who study Canadian working class history must continue to engage with Marxist understandings of class. Okay. So now, moving on to strategy number 2. The second strategy we want to discuss is maintaining institutions that support the study of working class history. So as the field was developing in the 70s and 80s, scholars created a number of things to do just that. For instance, a group of historians established the Canadian Committee on Labour History, or CCLH, a subcommittee of the Canadian Historical Association. An academic journal, Labour Le Travail, which Kirk just spoke about, soon followed. So over the years, the CCLH and Labour Le Travail have provided spaces for the development of community and the dissemination of scholarship. They've also raised the profile of working class history within the broader field of Canadian history. And they have encouraged and celebrated the work of younger generations of scholars through the Eugene A. Forsey Prizes in Canadian Labour and Working Class History at the undergraduate and graduate level. In recent years, however, the number of people identifying as labour and working class historians has declined dramatically. In turn, there are fewer historians participating in and supporting these institutions. As such, the responsibility of maintaining committees, journals, and prizes, and of carving out new spaces to support the study of working class history falls to a handful of people. It's crucial that institutions like the CCLH and Labour Le Travail not only survive, but thrive. Scholars can help this work along in a number of ways, including attending annual meetings and agreeing to serve on editorial boards and prize committees. At the same time, working class historians need to replenish their ranks by building new relationships with colleagues working in other disciplines and by fostering the development of future generations of scholars. The CCLH and Labour Le Travail have always welcomed scholars from other disciplines, and the new partnership between the CCLH and the Canadian Association for Work and Labour Studies, Stephanie Ross, the head is sitting right there. Chair, President, what's your title?
Yes, Empress. No.
Empress. And that new relationship will build on this interdisciplinary tradition in working class history and will no doubt have a positive effect on the field. In terms of students, There is, of course, a pressing need to continue teaching labor history, and Sean will take up that issue next.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I'm going to focus on teaching and public engagement as two other strategies that can help build working class history, both inside and outside of the academy. I want to start first with teaching. Julia's talked about the importance of maintaining and carving out institutional spaces to support the study of working class history. But we also need to fight for space within the university. For example, by pushing for new hires in labor and working class history, by offering labor history courses to attract new students. Simply put, if working class history is to have a future, it has to be taught in the classroom. Julie and I, for example, were both introduced to labor history during our undergraduate degrees at Simon Fraser University, where we took courses on the subject with people like Mark Lear and Alan. And now here we are today talking about the history of working class history, or the future of working class history. We can attest to the transformational effects of learning about labor's past. Yet many prominent scholars of the field have retired or will be doing so soon. Fewer people teaching labor history means fewer opportunities for students to take these transformational, consciousness-raising courses. This is unfortunate because issues of work, class, and capitalism have arguably never been more pressing for students. Many students juggle multiple part-time jobs to cover the rising costs of post-secondary education, and they have limited prospects for secure, well-paying employment after they graduate, to mention nothing of student debt. Giving students the tools to analyze class inequality and class struggle historically can help them make sense of their lives and at the same time foster their interest in working class history and activism. In the age of the corporate university where butts and seats is a prime factor in scheduling course offerings, it is important that those who can teach labor and working class history do so, and that they fight for such courses to exist as those who started the field did. And where labor history courses don't yet exist, they should be developed and delivered regularly. These courses should synthesize the developments of the field for students and offer a broad understanding of the working class that emphasizes the intersections of race, gender, and class, which will allow an increasingly diverse student population to see themselves as historical agents. As well, it is important to ensure that students have a firm understanding of 19th century capitalist social relations and state formation, as well as the development of the labor movement and labor struggles in the 20th century. A longer view of workers' struggles is necessary as activists today seek to rebuild effective left mobilization. It might also be a good time to rethink what labor history classes look like, and perhaps develop courses like labor history through film or popular culture to attract students to the field. But while more and more people are attending university, and thus potentially can be exposed to working class courses, we must resist the temptation to put the fate of labor history solely in the hands of academics. Indeed, there are few universities hiring historians of labor and working class history, especially in the Canadian context, and the path from interested undergraduate student to tenured professor is a difficult one. We think then that we must also look outside of the academy. While working class history seems to be a specialization on the ropes within academia, if we look beyond the university, there are some encouraging signs and intriguing possibilities for collaboration. In fact, in the realm of public history, there are a number of groups doing exciting work with labor and working class history that deserve our support as well as our time and energy. Historians within the academy will do well to continue, as those that started the field did, to build relationships with folks doing public labor history, and there are precedents for this. The Labor and Working Class History Association is quite active in making connections with school teachers in the US and bridging the gap between activists and academics. And every year the CCLH hosts a labor history workshop that brings activists and academics together to learn and strategize here in Canada. Maintaining and further developing these linkages will be key to renewing labor and working class history as a political project going forward. There are also a number of other groups and institutions that could benefit from greater engagement of this kind. For example, There are a number of political magazines such as Canadian Dimension and Briar Patch. There are film festivals like the Canadian Labour and International Film Festival, or CLIF, that showcases interesting documentaries on various aspects of labour history. And there are websites like Active History and Rank and File that try to distill important lessons of the past for activists today. Nevertheless, greater emphasis can still be placed on the usefulness of deep historical contextualization of current events. Activists need a longer view of the history of workers' struggles, and academic engagement with magazines and websites like these can help provide some of that necessary context. As well, there are various public history initiatives, such as the Workers' Arts and Heritage Centre in Hamilton, the Workers' Museum in Ottawa, and the Labour Heritage Centre in Vancouver. These groups offer a number of great services and programs on labour and working class history in Canada, including developing curriculum with high school teachers, running children's events and walking tours, and even popularizing labour history with a series of short films that were uploaded online so as to be easily shared on social media where so many people are getting their news and information. These initiatives need our support, but also our expertise to ensure critical research continues to shape popular perceptions of working class history. New mediums also deserve our consideration, like podcasts and comic books. As Alan mentioned, Julie and I are members of the Graphic History Collective, which combines the insights of labor and working class history with the medium of comics to make its lessons more accessible to wider audiences. GHC Comics embody in praxis the 4 strategies that Julie and I have outlined in this paper for building labor and working class history moving forward. In terms of conquering old positions, much of our work returns to the studies of working class history produced in the 1970s and 1980s. The comics focus on class formation and class conflict, and they seek to highlight inspirational stories of working class struggle. For example, we created a 10-page comic book based on Brian and Greg's research on the Knights of Labor. In terms of utilizing institutional resources, we work with groups like the CCLH and LACHA and the Morgan Center for Labor Research at Simon Fraser University, and we present papers and do art installations at academic conferences to increase the presence of working class history within academia. In terms of teaching, we create our comics with teachers in mind, as we try to give them easy and inspirational resources with which to teach labor history at the secondary and post-secondary levels. Lastly, we work with public history groups like the Labour Heritage Centre and sites like Rank and File and Active History to popularize our projects to create more awareness about working class history generally. So to conclude, Julie and I think the history of working class history lies in scholars and activists working together to dream of what might be and to develop new strategies to popularize the study of labor and working class history broadly, both academically and publicly. This does not require a reinventing of the wheel, but rather a returning to old positions in order to conquer new ones. And this task is an important one with a sense of urgency. At a time when we are told that there are no alternatives to capitalism, and when the left in Canada and elsewhere has grown stagnant and seems confused as to what its role in social struggles should be, a hope for a better world which runs throughout so much of working class history is perhaps more important now than ever. Revitalizing working class history intellectually, institutionally, pedagogically, and publicly then can help ensure that the field continues to be a resource for guiding new struggles for social change in the present and in the future.